This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
Today, we're joined by Steve Nash, a long-standing figure in the automotive world after 26 years at BMW. Now the CEO of the Institute of the Motor Industry, Steve shares his thoughts on professional standards, technological innovation, and the need for continuous training to keep pace with the industry's rapid changes. Tune in for an engaging discussion that touches on everything from diversity to the future of mobility. So I'm delighted to welcome Steve Nash with me here for Bridge's Leap Forward podcast series. Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, well, good to be here.
First of all, tell us a little bit about your career to date.
Okay, well, that's quite a long story, actually. I mean, I've been in the industry a good few decades. So, I mean, for me, I kind of fell into the motor industry, really. I started off through a summer job, graduated, went off to train as a chartered accountant because I didn't know what else to do. And then found myself doing an audit in a big dealer one day. And somebody said to me, God, you're in your element here. This is what you ought to do. They were joking and I took it seriously. And I went to work for the company I'd been working for as a student. I was just doing a job delivering parts in a van, which was great fun at the time. So I went and joined Chrysler as it was as a graduate trainee, spent a bit of time with them. When they exited the UK, I ended up with Renault for a number of years. I decided I needed to get more. I'd had a bit of experience with in retail with Chrysler, but I decided I wanted to get more hands-on. So I went to run a BMW retail operation out of Renault after I left Renault. That was my introduction to BMW. Very quickly realised that I liked BMW and would like to work for them. So I saw an opportunity and went to go and work for them. That was really like climbing a mountain at the time because I think I had 6 or 7 interviews for that job. They had so many applicants and everybody from a couple of external interviews to what was then personnel to then the sort of direct line manager to the head of department to the directors, but you really felt you climbed a mountain when you got in there. And that was the start of a 26-year career with BMW where I did a whole load of things. I had a great career there because I sort of rolled up like a snowball. I sort of never let go of any responsibilities. I just kept gaining more. It culminated in me becoming along the way, I set up BMW's right-hand drive engineering program. And then I became a director of the company, and very quickly that snowballed into being a director of Rover and Land Rover too, because we owned them at that time. But after the disposal, I continued as in a group role, looking after BMW Mini and with some Rolls-Royce responsibilities as well. Very much involved in the launch of Mini, and left there. But along the way, somewhere in the about 2002, I think it was, I was approached to become a board member for the IMI. And not long after, I don't believe ever saying yes. I ever said yes, but I got these papers through the post telling me I'd been elected unopposed. Oh, right, okay. And I hadn't been doing it long when they said to me, would I take on the role of chairman? So, cutting a very long story short, I was chairman and president for the best part of 10 years. And then when my predecessor was due to be replaced, was leaving to move on, I was in the process of finding a new CEO, and people kept saying to me, well, why don't you do it? Mm-hmm. And eventually the penny dropped. And I thought, well, that's a bit arrogant to say it, but probably nobody who knew better what was needed next than I did, because I was close enough to see that. So that brought me to the IMI, and I've been running the IMI since the beginning of 2013. Along the way, I picked up the chairmanship of Ben, the industry charity, which I've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years as well. So thoroughly steeped in the industry.
Incredible perspective. Tell us a little bit about the IMI.
So the IMI is the industry's professional body. In fact, nobody had actually worked out. It was something that dawned on me when I took over. There are a lot of trade bodies in automotive. It's an extremely diverse industry. We have more than 48 trade bodies in the automotive industry, which kind of gives you an idea. They all do great things, but we're not a trade body. Mm-hmm. We're a body that represents individuals working in the industry, and we're not unique as a professional body, but we're unusual in that we represent an entire sector. Not most professional bodies represent a specific occupation. We represent everything, soup to nuts, within the entire industry. So the whole 800 and odd thousand people that work in the industry are potentially members. Over 110,000 of them are members. We operate in over 50 countries around the world because there is nobody else that does what we do anywhere else. There is no other professional body for automotive people anywhere else in the world. So and our job. I mean, we were set up in 1920, and we were set up then for this sort of nascent automotive industry which had no professional standards. We were set up to put those in place. Nobody knew what the professional standards for an automotive marketing person or a managing director or whatever would be, and so our job was to make that happen, and we've been doing that ever since. But fast forward 100 or so years, 104 years, and here we are, almost back there with a newly nascent industry, really, with lots and lots of new things happening. It's not just the technology, the distribution model. Everything is sort of in a state of change. So, I think we have a very important role.
Tell me more about the role today, and that sort of new chapter, I suppose, that the sector is going through.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's deal with the technology bit first. So it's what we refer to as ACEs, or some people say CASE, but who cares? It's basically autonomous, connected, electric, and shared mobility. These four pillars of this sort of newly emerging automotive industry. One of the first things that I saw as being incredibly important is, along the way, over that last 100 or so years, there's never actually been any regulation around who can service and repair cars. Most people are surprised by that, including the politicians. When you ask them, they all believe there must be something in place, but they don't ever remember doing it. You know what I mean? And it's like, so even ministers of transport, many of whom I've spoken to, are quite surprised when you say to them, well, anybody can set themselves up to service and repair cars. But that has to change because, it's one thing to tinker around with an internal combustion engine because, we've got 100 years of collective knowledge on that. And, although actually modern internal combustion engine cars are pretty damn complicated to work on. So not many people do that anymore. But you start playing around with an electrified vehicle in whatever form that is, a plug-in hybrid or a full electric. You could be messing around with 800 to 1,000 volts of direct current, and that could be fatal. So we obviously needed regulation and standards around that, and that's what we have in IMI TechSafe. So that's about helping people to become compliant with the Electricity at Work Act, and we have similar things in place for automated driver assistance systems and so on. So the days of being of the gifted amateur are over. Emphatically, you've got to be properly qualified, and you've got to be able to demonstrate that you're qualified. And there are legal risks if you're not on with these new technologies. It beggars belief that you would get into a car that has any kind of autonomous capability that had been set up and worked on by somebody who didn't really know what they were doing, any more than you would get on an aircraft that had been worked on by an amateur, So we have a very important role around all of that. But there are other changes, aren't there? I mean, you've got big changes coming to the distribution model, the move from franchise to agency. That's changing the shape of the industry and the kind of roles that exist. Most people don't know that within automotive retail alone, there's more than 250 different jobs. And I mean, I know that's true because we've got somebody talking about all of those jobs on our website. And that surprises most people who even work in the sector. Certainly surprises people outside of the sector. So the opportunities are big, but they're changing all the time. So we're going to need new skills to service an agency situation, as opposed to a franchise situation. And and then of course there is AI and other changes coming that mean that the processes will change. And so the skills we need are ever moving, and the people that we consider to be automotive people, that's an ever changing population. Some years ago, I remember saying to my team, if I press a button in my car, it's all done electronically now, but at one time it took me straight through to a call center. And I could say to that person who answered the phone, not the phone, but who came through it is the phone really, but it's coming through my communication system in the car. I'm on my way to York. Can you recommend and book me a hotel, and can you find me a restaurant? And so the whole concierge service thing. And I said, the person I'm speaking to there is an automotive employee. You might not have ever thought about that, but in this new emerging world, that person's an automotive employee, just like the software engineers who are now working on, automated mobility and all the rest of it. They may have come from Microsoft or Apple or wherever, but they're now automotive people, and we have to embrace them.
Yeah. And the cybersecurity,
of
and
course.
The list goes on and on.
Of course, yeah, exactly. So it's a moving feast. But for there will always be the need, though, for professional standards and for people to be able to differentiate the professional from the unprofessional, if you know what I mean. And we are. We're going to be riding two horses for quite a long time, because there's 50 million cars vehicles on the road in the UK. They're not going to disappear overnight. They're going to be with us for many decades. But depending on what happens with ever flip-flopping regulation and everything else, we are inexorably moving into an electrified world. And whether that includes hydrogen and other things or not, that's where we're going. And so, but to me, that's what's exciting about it, really.
That change and innovation.
Yeah, who wants to spend their life just minding the shop? You know what I mean? Being involved in facilitating change and helping people, come along with that change is what it's all about, really.
And how have you learned to really embed and generate those professional standards? What's the process that you go through as from an IMI perspective? Because you've obviously got that background from what you did at BMW with the right hands, and so forth. But so you got your own kind of personal experience of that. But as the IMI, how do you approach that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because from a personal point of view, when I was running a dealer operation, I very quickly realised, for example, the value of apprentices. So much so that when I joined BMW, and the perennial sort of thing about we don't have enough technicians and all the rest of it, it's like, well, why don't we grow our own then? Why don't we have an apprentice scheme? So I was instrumental in setting up that apprentice scheme at BMW, which has been running since the late 80s now, and many thousands of apprentices have gone through it, and the academy reported to me as well there. So I've always had this belief in the development of people, and there always will be people who operate sort of slightly on the wrong side of the professional standards. So you need to be but there's a real desire amongst because there's a certain sort of view amongst certain members of certain sectors of society that the term automotive professional is almost an oxymoron. That how can you be professional in the automotive industry? Well, so we need to be able to make that differentiation, so that we can say whatever it is you do, there are standards that you can attain and demonstrate, and and that goes right the way up to the boardroom. And the more that we can do that, the more that we can build confidence in the industry. Because the popular image isn't set by us. It's set by, Phil Mitchell on EastEnders or Arthur Daly or whatever. And, let's be honest, those elements exist, but less and less and less so. And the other completely extreme difference, the workshops you could eat your dinner off. You could literally eat your dinner off the floor of the high technology stuff, the sophistication and the processes. Is something that we need to be talking. We need to stop worrying about countering wrong perceptions and just create new ones. It's one of the reasons why a year or so back, one of our vice presidents is Linda Jackson, who's the worldwide head of Peugeot, and Linda was extremely helpful in lending us the services of her international marketing team and her international marketing agency to pull together a campaign called There's More to Motor. And There's More to Motor is about featuring real life, real voices, real people talking about the jobs they do, but changing perceptions, because there will be people that doing jobs you may not know existed, and people that you wouldn't be expect to be doing those jobs. And more people are recognizing that actually this is a good way. Toyota have just come on board with us, because we're only so big, we can't do the whole job for the motor industry, but Toyota have come on board with us. Virtue, the dealer group, are looking to kind of do some work with us. So I believe that we've started a movement which will stop people going, I wish they wouldn't talk about Swiss Tony and Arthur Daly and Phil Mitchell and all the rest. It's like, you know what, they will, but we'll create a completely new set of images that are real and make our industry more aspirational.
And accessible, I think, as
Absolutely.
well. And that's really key, isn't it?
Yeah.
Making sure that you have a really a kind of inclusive and accessible kind of talent base.
Yeah. Look, we have an existential problem. We came out of the pandemic as a sort of a joint kind of effect of both, I guess, Brexit and the pandemic. We came out of the pandemic with a record number of vacancies, and the only sector worse affected than us was hospitality, and sad to say, hospitality's got a bit better. We've languished a bit. We peaked at around 24,000 vacancies. We're at about 22 now, but that's still a huge number, and and you can't change anything by continuing to do the same thing. You've got to go after, that's why one of the first things we did coming out of the pandemic was establish our industry task force around equity, diversity and inclusion, because, we've been a male-dominated industry for a very long time. And to be blunt, that's been predominantly white males as well, particularly when you get to sort of middle management and above. And that, you simply can't sustain an industry on that. So we need to bring people from everywhere. We need to recognise people with visible and invisible disabilities. Whatever gender they may identify as. We just need talent. The great thing is that when people do embrace that. Look, I understand what it's like on the retail side, because when you lose a key member of staff, you just want to clone of that person tomorrow morning, because whether that's a person who sells you a certain number of cars or somebody or hours or whatever it may be, you're so driven, it's got to make the day, to make the week, to make the month, to make the quarter, half a breath, and then do it all over again. So, and typically, that means, employing a warm body. Sometimes, very often, people don't ask a question when somebody turns up for the interview, and you look, they've worked for 6 or 7 other organizations doing the same job. Why are they here? What are they going to bring to the party? When people have properly embraced the diversity thing, and I know the HR director of one of the big groups who said to me, I don't let the managers select people anymore. What we do is we take the vacancy, we go out and we find people, we run sort of assessment centres, and then we give them a choice of a group of people. So, but almost none of them would be the sort of people because they would be saying, well, they need to have done X number of years experience, and it's like, well, that's just a clone of the person you lost. And they said what they get back all the time is, I would never have thought of employing that person, but they're brilliant. They bring something new to the team. They don't just do things because we've always done them. and it is what, all the research tells you, isn't it? That, a diverse workforce is a more productive workforce.
100%, and represents the customers that you're looking
Yeah.
to engage with.
So
right?
for those people who are cynical, it's not about being super woke.
Nope.
It's about being a practical business person and saying, look, you can go on looking for the same people from the same dwindling pool if you want to, but while others are actually being more progressive and moving forward, and actually their businesses are benefiting. And with 22,000 vacancies, and in some subsectors, it's really acute. I mean, if you get right the way down to sort of brass tacks, I mean, finding people to replace tyres on trucks is really it's vitally important to our transport network, but really difficult. Getting people to work in body shops, really difficult. Aging workforces and not enough people coming in the bottom end, but also regionally. So the There's More to Motor campaign we've deliberately run it in regions where we know they have a particularly acute problem, and we've seen some fantastic results. More than 5 million impressions with our ads that we've run, and we've definitely seen the needle move in terms of recruitment. And we can, because there's no point in kidding ourselves. If it's not working, it's not working. But we've actually seen people come through the system and get employed as a result of having been enticed by that campaign. So, we're looking forward to working with more big players to just keep that ball rolling.
So, I mean, you've shared quite a lot of initiatives to get that number down.
Yeah.
What else can we do?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, we run the World Skills Competitions. They're a brilliant way of demonstrating to people what good looks like. What you can achieve, and they're an amazingly diverse group of people that come through. A couple of years ago, one of our gold medalists. So we run the sort of UK skills competitions, and then they go on to world skills, and they compete with the best from around the world. And a young lady who won the heavy vehicle technician, I mean, she's about 5 foot, possibly not quite,
Yep.
Super skilled though. And of course, these days, I mean, even a big beefy bloke would struggle to lift off a truck wheel. So you have equipment to do it, There's really not a job that anyone's precluded from for physical reasons anymore. And because the job has become more cerebral too, because so much of what we do now is about programming and fault finding and so on. And, so I mean, that sort of thing always helps. We do an enormous amount with schools. We provide complete lesson plans mapped to the national curriculum, but which include an automotive theme. We do the designer car competition through lots of age groups, because we found through research that it's amazing how young people are when they believe they've already worked out what they want to be and what they don't want to be. So it's not secondary school. It's not when they're doing GCSEs. It's probably when they're 11 or younger. And of course, you've got to do more than that, because parents who don't have any knowledge of our industry don't aspire to their kids working in it. So they'll try and move them off elsewhere. And so we have to do a lot there too, it's really important though that we do as much as we can. That's why we have people like Linda Jackson and a number of others, a number of other grandees from the industry who work with us as vice presidents, because not only do they help us where they can to open doors or to engage people where maybe we don't have the direct influence, but they can engage with us when they see the sense of what we're doing. Because we're an organization of 120 people, we can't boil the ocean, but we can start warming it up, and then they can kind of, if they join us, I realized this back when I was at BMW. I mean, BMW is a great brand. I mean, has huge leverage, but I realized that on my own, I still didn't have enough clout to make, wholesale changes for the industry, and that we're all making all these efforts on our own, and actually most of it goes to waste. If there's more collective and joined up effort, yes, it's a highly competitive business. I mean, even within brands, there's competition between dealers of the same brand and so on. It's innately within us to be out there and competing and so on. But it's understanding where you have a common interest, and it's in our common interest to actually, build the workforce we need for the future. And we aren't going to do that while we sort of carry on looking at 22,000 vacancies,
Absolutely. And obviously there's the 22,000 vacancy sort of gap challenge goal, but then you've brought it down from 24 to 22, but then you've got to retain those folks, and then you've got to grow them. How do you go about that?
Yeah, and I mean obviously some of that is around showing people there's a career, not a job. And as I've said, I mean, there is a career, because I mean, if you just look at the retail side of the business, as I said, 250 odd jobs out there. So there's lots of things that people can do, and we do as a sector invest a lot in training. We do. I mean, I calculated when I joined the IMI, when I took over at the IMI in 2013, that we were spending then north of 100 million a year on training people, because I knew, the BMW Academy, when it was reporting to me, was doing more than 50,000 training days a year. And I knew what they cost. And talking to the people who ran similar operations around, you could sort of gross it up fairly quickly. And I also knew that the big retail groups spend a load of money outside of what the brands ask them to spend. So there's no short, I mean, it's a great place to work if you want, and we're a meritocracy, aren't we, as an industry? And I love that about the industry, is that it doesn't really matter where you start. Once you're in, if you demonstrate capability and a willingness to be developed as a person, there's no. I mean, I'm immensely proud of when I look at some of the people who I brought into the industry and where they are today. I mean, somebody I brought in as an apprentice in the internal workshop at BMW now runs the whole China operation for BMW, which is enormous. Came in as a 17-year-old school leaver, very, very bright, but didn't want to do the kind of A-level university thing. Absolutely creamed the apprenticeship, as an outstanding student, but he was very quickly recognized as somebody who could do stuff, make a difference. By the time I left, he was sales director at BMW UK. So say he's been in China for a number of years now and has got this enormous job, and he's still only in his early to mid 50s, so he hasn't finished yet. And that's what we can do in our industry. And there are many examples of that. I look at people like Darren Edwards, who's the chief executive of Sytner Group, started as an apprentice, but look where he is today. And these are things we need to communicate to parents and to youngsters. I mean, not all industries are like that. There are a lot of industries you won't even get in unless you've got a minimum level of qualification. And we recognise that you kind of need both. You need the education, but you need the application as well.
And when you're thinking about upskilling, training, and that sort of development, how have you seen that evolve over time? What role is technology playing? And tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, that's pretty huge. I mean, I know. Well, I mean, take an example. The Mercedes-Benz Academy. I think they're delivering the vast majority of their training now electronically, whereas they used to predominantly bring people into the academy and train them. They do it remotely now. Now I say an organisation of 120 odd people with 55 countries to cover, different time zones and everything else. We have to be smart with how we do that, and that's about employing technology. And that's getting better and better all the time. So because we're as part of our role, we're a regulated awarding body where the well, we're the biggest and actually only completely dedicated automotive awarding body. And we're regulated. We got 4 regulators in the UK alone. There's a different one for, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And it's a very high bar that you have to constantly meet. But we're constantly working with the regulators. We did a lot. For example, in the pandemic, we had a huge number of learners that got kind of caught. They were part way through their apprenticeship or whatever other program they were on, and there's a strict order in which you're supposed to do certain things within the apprenticeship. We worked with the regulators to say, we could move these people on if you allow us to do certain things with remote technologies. It's sophisticated enough now that we can make sure it's the right person doing it, it's time stamped, it's security checked and all the rest of it. But either they sit and languish for as long as this takes, or we can start moving them on. And they actually work with us, and we haven't gone backwards, which is really, really good. We work with a charity that I've got an enormous amount of time for. It's called First Step Trust. And what First Step Trust do is they take people who are technically unemployable, people who've got mainly mental health issues, but that can include addictions and all sorts of things. And believe me, sometimes they're absolutely profound problems. People who you would never think you could get into the workplace. And they have a number of garages and a restaurant, and everybody working there has come through this route. And we helped them earlier, many years ago, when I was introduced to them. I took it upon myself to help them get those people qualified, find ways. And if somebody is profoundly dyslexic, how do they sit an exam? So we've found ways of getting the regulators to accept them using VR and other technologies to demonstrate their capabilities, and other remote technologies. And we've actually seen a number of these people who hitherto would never have ever thought they could get a job. And we worked together with, I brought other organisations into the party, like Halfords, for example, who now employ those people. So they get qualified in First Step Trust's own garages, and then they go on to Halfords, and Halfords continue the process. Now, and those transformations are something to be incredibly proud of. Wouldn't be possible without the use of technologies, though.
That's really interesting. You talk about the technology side of things. We've talked a little bit already around sort of, kind of the A of, in terms of autonomous, the other A of AI, and what role does AI have in skills development and professional kind of progression?
Well, I mean, I know it's going to be enormous. I think we're still kind of trying to find out, really, because it's a question that I sometimes get asked by some of our vice presidents. It's like, what are you doing about AI? That's almost a how long is a piece of string thing, isn't it? But we know that, I mean, AI is obviously going to play an enormous part in training, both in terms of training delivery and what's possible, particularly remotely, but also we have to be cognizant of particularly, I mean, actually less so with technical stuff where people have to demonstrate a direct technical skill, but when people are sort of doing non-technical stuff where they're maybe providing projects or written, how do you check that they actually did it and it wasn't something that they went into Chat GPT and got and drew off, so and again that's vexing the regulators at the moment. How do they make sure that because they already had programs that sort of checked for plagiarism, didn't they? But this is way more sophisticated because it's capable of learning how to get around that, isn't it? So I think it's tremendously exciting. I tell you what, I was saying to somebody earlier on today, actually, that in my career I must have sat through at BMW and the IMI and even before that, any number of times when we've sat down and gone, I think we need to update our vision and our mission and our purpose. And then you go through this what can often be a rather tiresome process of all these people sitting in a room trying to wordsmith this perfect sentence, and I just have one requirement from things like a vision, and that's that it's short enough for people to remember it. Otherwise, what's the point of having one, And I was going through this process for what must be the nth time in my working life. And I just went into ChatGPT and put a couple of, just explain what I wanted. Just like that, it came up with the perfect form of words. And, I love that. I love that because it's capable of taking away the stuff that we don't really need to be doing and letting us get on with the stuff we do need to be doing. I in all my career, and the large part of it was most of it was working on the manufacturer side, interfacing with dealers, although I was a dealer for a period of time. But in all that time, we've always been obsessed with customer satisfaction. We've measured it every way you can imagine over the years. The thing that always struck me, there were a number of things that always struck me about it. First of all, however you measured it, you tended to get the same people come out at the top, same people come out at the bottom. The other thing that struck me is I never came across a dealer who willfully gave bad service. I never came across a dealer that wasn't capable of giving good service. The difference between those ones who nearly always came at the top and the ones who struggled was consistency. So the guys near the top, you could pretty well be sure that whatever day of whatever week you went in there, within a very narrow band, you were going to get the same level of service. The other guys, you might have a great service one day, and then it might be rotten the next day, And I believe that by employing technology, and AI particularly, there's an awful lot of processes that you can actually improve to be consistent. So I don't like traditional call answering services because they're found wanting, aren't they? And chat room, the chatbots and stuff like that. But done right and taken to a different level, you could ensure that people got, particularly with the sort of the ambition to move more transactions online. If you've got a system that learns and understands and has the intelligence to go beyond that sort of very limited range of questions, you get away from that computer says no type scenario. Then I think you could close the gap between the best and the not so good by ensuring that many of the processes that you need in a business have greater consistency.
100% and very much personalized and scenario based.
Of course. Yeah. It's, as I say, the basic things like quality control processes in a service workshop or whatever, when it all relies on people, it has a degree of inconsistency inevitably. Now, some businesses are disciplined enough to make sure they've got, they overcome that. But the majority of businesses, those top 4 or 5 dealers that are always there, in whichever network you're looking at, are extraordinary, really, and they go to extraordinary lengths. Even they, though, could find it easier to do what they've always done well and maybe put less, manpower into it and free off people to do other things that only people can do, by having processes that they can trust to do that and to be more consistent.
You talked about IMI being in 55 countries, and you've obviously had a career working for global brands as well. What is it that we can learn from some of those other markets? What are the nuances and differences, and what can we learn from them?
Well, I think that's always struck me. I had quite a bit of overseas experience with BMW. I worked with a lot of overseas markets. Obviously spent Munich was my second home for many years, but spent time in the States, South Africa, and so on. And there are clearly cultural differences, but you only just scrape below that. That's a veneer almost. Below that, actually, the issues that they face and the challenges and so on are identical. But from time to time, you come across something that another market. Actually, South Africa was an interesting example for me because you will very often find. I know this was the case for BMW, but I find when I talk to people who work or have worked for other brands that quite often the UK subsidiary of that brand is considered to be a very good subsidiary. Where we knock ourselves a lot, but us Brits do quite a lot of things well. So we were often held up as a bit of an example within the BMW world on a lot of things. The South African market was very similar in that, I mean, they are right-hand drive vehicles for one thing, same language more or less, but they were much smaller and had much smaller budgets, and quite often you'd look at the things they did and realize that what they've done there is really, really good, and it's cost a fraction of what it would have cost if we'd done it, because we would have thrown much more money at it. So I mean, it's always important, I think, to look outside of your own your own cocoon and recognize that you don't have a premium on all the good ideas. I think, though, again, the ability you have, technology sort of shrinks the world, doesn't it? And it enables you to import good ideas so much quicker and easier than was ever the case before. So, I mean, take China, for example. I mean, we're constantly debating how China is kind of, dominating the electric vehicle world. What people may not realize, though, is that China has a monumental problem with skills in its own, so not in the factory but outside the factory. They almost don't have a workforce who can actually service and maintain cars, particularly electric cars. So through a government to government connection with the two departments for business and trade, we were put forward by the UK government as the people who could help them answer that problem. So they are now engaging with us to use our qualifications. Effectively, it's what's behind IMI TechSafe, because they've seen that actually it's become a bit of a worldwide standard. We're being approached by people from countries all around the world going, we've seen what you do. We don't have anything like that in our country, but we'd like to use it. So I'm quite proud of the fact that we were ahead of the curve with that. But again, it's accessible, and it's something that we can actually achieve in China. I mean, if you'd gone back even 10 years, I would have had to have sent lots of people to China for lots of the time, to make that happen. But now it's a hell of a lot easier.
You can scale it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things about being a regulated awarding body is you have to be able to put the quality control processes in place that say that if somebody holds up that qualification in Beijing and says, I've just achieved this, it's exactly the same standard as somebody holding up that qualification in London or anywhere else in the world. And I say and the way we used to do it is we had people whose job it was to go round to the centres that deliver these qualifications and physically check and make sure all those processes are in place. We can do most of that remotely now. And that's changing the world, isn't it?
Let's fast forward 5 years. What does this world look like?
Oh God, I mean, I remember in my early days at BMW, we used to have a 20-year plan, and things like that. I mean, okay, it was a bit pie in the sky, but and then you sort of thought, well, let's make it a 10-year plan, and then a 5-year plan, and then you think, any strategy longer than 3 years, and even then, you're kind of guessing a bit once you get 18 months out, particularly at the moment. I think I think there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment which is kind of critical. I mean, there's a massive amount of policy. I think we're in a period at the moment, aren't we, where more people are going through elections than at any in major countries. And the combination of the environment and other regulations around automotive is going to be critical, really. I mean, there are rumours, so we've got this whole debate going on at the moment about tariffs on Chinese cars, and clearly some big players like Germany and France who are opposed to it, some southern European countries that are very for it. There'd be the reciprocal actions from China around that. We've already seen in the UK, 2030 slip to 2035, and that's had a profound effect. I mean, I can tell you that we recognised, when 2030 was first mandated, we realised that we were going to need somewhere just north of 100,000 technicians qualified to work on electric vehicles by 2030, and we were well on the way to that. We had a gap, but we were closing that gap. 2035 happened, and we haven't stopped, but the rate has slowed down because people are looking at it and going, well, it's 10 years away, more than 10 years away. So, I don't need to do that right now. And that's an unforeseen effect, because at the same time, the government said, yeah, but you've still got to make them with the zero emission vehicle mandate. And that's having other distorting effects, isn't it? About people going, oh, well, in order to meet that target, I'll have to sell less of the non-electric cars, or I'll have to, put money on the bonnet of the electric cars, which will distort the market for them, or buy credits off of Tesla or China or whatever. And it's, the politicians are responsible. We desperately need some consistency out of whoever takes over in July. But there are rumours of 2035 becoming 2040 in Europe, and these things are not helpful, because the technology is coming anyway, and not everybody's got their head around that yet. But I guess in 5 years' time, my earnest hope is that we'd be through a lot of that, and that people, I mean, there are still, I attended a conference last year, back end of last year, from one of the many subsectors. One of those 48 trade bodies was holding a conference that I went to, and the managing director of a big tyre company stood up, and apropos of nothing, because he was meant to be talking about new tyre technology, he opined that electric vehicles, that's not going to happen, is it? It's not the solution. And saying things like, if you had a car park full of electric vehicles, it would collapse, and if you had a traffic jam and a whole lot of electric vehicles were on a bridge, it would collapse. I mean, this is the same bridge that takes 18-wheeler trucks full of loads, with a full load. But and I said to the guy whose conference it was, I was looking around the room, and a lot of the people were nodding sagely, because he was telling them what they wanted to hear, but it was nonsense. It was nonsense. And I said to him, you've done your members no service at all there, because you're lulling them into a false sense of security. And he actually allowed me to write a piece for their magazine to sort of just put a different perspective on it. So my belief is that technology doesn't stop. So one way or another, the technology's coming. And I think we will find our way through the whole legislative mess that we're sort of in at the moment. I'd like to think we'll see some consistency. Our industry has been asking for an industrial policy for the longest time, and we haven't had one. Keir Starmer says he'll give us one, which hopefully, in the event that Labour get in, that he follows through with that. But I think it's going to be interesting. The one that's going to be interesting for me is how the distribution model develops, because there are definitely more people who are in the queue looking at going down the agency route. And I think that has more profound implications than a lot of people have realised, because on face value, it's about, well, okay, we no longer sell the car, the manufacturer does, but we still have, so we get a kind of handling charge for dealing with the customer, but we've still got our after sales business, we've still got our used car business. But when you think about it, if I was with my manufacturer hat on, what would I be looking to do? I would not really be looking to sell the car. I'd be looking to sell the use of it. So I'd be looking to sign you up for a 3 or 4 year contract on the car. So I retain the title. And guess what? When it comes back, I'll do that again.
Yeah.
So I don't have to, the more I do that, I don't have to worry about trade-ins because there isn't a trade-in. I just take the car back off you and give it to somebody else. I'm now paying for the servicing through my servicing contracts. So I say to the dealer network, well, as your biggest customer, I want the warranty rate on all the servicing, and, the used car may not emerge until that car's 8 or 10 years old. I don't want to be I'm not being an arbiter of doom here, but I mean that, so I'm not surprised. I mean, of course, there are much cleverer people than me that have already worked that out. The very clever people out there, running these big dealer groups and so on. And that's why I think a lot of them are looking at Chinese brands, because the majority of them are saying, we'll go. I mean, that might change over time, but they're certainly saying our entry into the market is through a traditional franchise route. These guys have got to look after their own interests, haven't they? The other big element that often gets overlooked is the rental and leasing companies. These guys own more cars than anybody else. So the bit I haven't talked about in the ACEs is the mobility bit. And if you wanted to buy, let's say you were looking at not actually taking the full use of a car, but buying the fractional use of a car. A car when I want it.
Yeah.
Who's better at supplying that than those guys? Because they have enormous fleets. They can also give you what you want when you want it. So if you want a sports car for the weekend or a 4x4 or whatever, they could provide all of that. It's the subscription model, isn't it? But so it would be silly to ignore what those guys are capable of bringing to the market too. I think the mobility thing's had a false start because, first of all, the response to it in terms of demand has been very patchy around Europe. I believe in Germany it's quite strong, and some of the early ventures that were set up by OEMs, by manufacturers, have been relatively successful there. And in some other places, they really couldn't get arrested with them here. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, and the idea of jumping in a car that somebody else had been in, was something somewhat diminished, in terms of appeal. But I still don't think it's a dead duck. I think that, we will see that emerging in some form or another. I'm actually speaking at a conference very soon. There's an annual, well, it's actually a worldwide thing. It moves around the world, but it's an annual event here called Move, and Move is all about the whole new technology piece. And so it's always interesting to hear what new ideas have come forward. And of course, like anything, 90 or 95% of them will go nowhere. But it's the 5% that do that you are looking for, really. So I believe there will be a thriving automotive industry people are always going to need mobility, aren't they? I mean, that never dawned on me more than 2 years ago. I moved, having lived in London all my life, or on the edge of London, moving out to rural Norfolk. You seriously couldn't manage without a car. This idea that so much of the opinion that's offered is offered by people who live in London, who've got Uber and the Tube and everything else. I mean, actually, a car is almost a liability in the middle of London now, isn't it? Yep. Hard to get it insured, nowhere to park it. Charges coming in at you left, right, and centre for congestion and this, that, and the other. But when you don't have to go very far outside the M25 to realise that it's not like that everywhere else. And the car is, personal mobility is an economic necessity.
Absolutely right. Drives social mobility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last question for you. Someone's listening or watching this podcast. They're thinking about entering this industry. What's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Do it. No, I mean, really, honestly, I would say to them, actually, talk to us, the IMI. We've got a great careers team who can really help you kind of sort the wheat from the chaff. What is right for you? Because, if you're faced with 250 different types of roles, where would you fit in best? And don't assume that you are excluded in any way, shape or form. I mean, one of the very simple things we took out of the EDI task force was some of we were getting lived experience from people. We had 3 different groups. We had one on visible and invisible disabilities, one on race and ethnicity, and one on gender. And each of those groups gave us experiences, and it was really interesting. The visible and invisible disabilities one. Somebody said to us, it's almost a standard thing that people put on their application forms, must have a clean driving license. So if you're partially sighted, you're automatically disqualified. But there are loads of jobs that a partially sighted person could do, or somebody with another reason why they can't drive. And so, but we can help people work their way through that and find out, the right sort of employers for them. I would not change a thing. If I was starting all over again, I wouldn't hesitate to join the automotive industry. It's been brilliant for me. I've seen the world done, had amazing experiences, and I think it's going to be different. It's going to be different, and I can't say I've got the total crystal ball and exactly what it will look like in 5 or 10 years' time, but it'll still be here and it'll still be thriving and it'll be a great place to work.
Thank you for a very, very inspiring conversation, Steve.
It's been great. I really enjoyed it.